Hello, I'm J. Alfred Johnson II, your North American Division Adult Ministries Director. Welcome to the closing edition, not the final edition, but the closing edition of our North American Division Digital Discipleship and Evangelism webinar series with digital strategist, Mrs. Jamie Dom. And Sister Dom, you have been a real blessing to us. Your topic tonight is understanding your audience for effective communication. Before we hear from Jamie, let's talk to God. Loving Lord, we thank you so very much for being with us throughout this entire series with Sister Jamie Dom. Thank you for the gifts that you have given her, and thank you for the attentive nature that you have placed in us as we have received that which she has shared. We pray that your spirit will be upon her tonight and upon us as we receive. Thank you, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And now, Jamie, the microphone is yours.
Hi, and thank you for having me back for this sixth and final night. Today, we're going to talk about understanding your audience for effective communication. And this is a really important topic because I truly believe that each person, ministry, and local church is uniquely equipped and positioned to reach a different type of people. Therefore, it is vital to understand who your audience is before you create content, write a single, social media post, or spend any money on social advertisement. This presentation that we're going to cover tonight will not only give you a framework for successfully defining your target audience, but will help you learn how to effectively shape your messages and content to match your audience's needs and reach them effectively, no matter their age, gender, ethnicity, location, or situation. This presentation will equip you to reach them where they are. Now, I know many of you may feel like you already know how to use social media platforms for personal sharing, but writing to achieve a marketing or evangelism goal requires much more thought and strategic planning. This presentation is designed to help you kind of get into the head of your audience, because oftentimes when we share for personal reasons on social media, it's coming from a me perspective, sort of a selfie kind of about me. But this, we're going to actually talk about how to communicate so that you connect with your audience. And we're going to cover things like surface level demographics, core values and felt needs, so going deeper, this concept of cultural empathy, internal and external audiences, because sometimes we can create barriers with our words, understanding the drivers behind culture shifts, personas, and the EMV, which is this emotional marketing value. So how we actually phrase our titles, because our content cannot create impact unless it's seen. All right, so good communication is when you communicate in a way that your audience understands. Now, it is essential that we not only communicate clearly, but that we also take the time to deeply understand our audience. It doesn't matter if you know what you mean. Your audience must understand your message and connect with it. So, how do we do that? Empathy first. And guys, if you've been with us throughout this series, I use the word empathy a lot. It's my favorite word. I think it's vital that we start to embrace this concept when it comes to digital communications. To do this, we must first put yourself in your audience's shoes and speak to them accordingly. Speak to your audience in a way and with the words that enable them to understand and connect with your message. So when we say remember empathy first, this means that when we communicate in the digital space, we must speak the language of the platform and recognize the cultural expectations and norms prevalent in that space. So if we go all the way back to the beginning of the series, if we think of platforms, social media platforms as countries, then there are language, there's cultural norms and expectations that we must adopt in our communication and respect in our communication. So without careful research, our words and our intentions can easily be taken the wrong way. inadvertently offending and pushing away the very people we are trying to reach. Now, as a marketing rule of thumb, this is something I want you to keep in mind. If you try to reach everyone all the time, you'll end up reaching no one because your message will be distilled too much and it won't be relevant to anyone. I know as Christians, we want to reach and include everybody. This is our ultimate goal. But from a specific ministry standpoint, this approach ends up reducing the relevancy of the message and spreads efforts too thin for significant impact. After all, again, if you try to reach everyone all the time, you'll end up reaching no one. This is why we have the church body. Everybody is uniquely positioned to reach somebody. And so we have all of the church body working in concert to reach everyone, but we can each specialize. Our ministries and our churches can specialize in reaching certain types of people. Now, it is each person, ministry, and local church. As I said, I believe you are uniquely equipped and positioned to reach a specific audience. Therefore, it is vital to understand who your audience is before you create your content. This section will help you learn how to effectively shape your messages and your content to match your audience's needs and reach them effectively. So let's get into this first sort of surface level demographics. Now, these are the type of demographics that probably all of you are familiar with because this is generally what we focus on. So the first step in reaching your audience is to develop a clear picture of who you're talking to. And we should begin with these surface level demographics. But as we go through this presentation, you'll see that we really do need to go much deeper. Basic demographic information is, or their characteristics are things like location. Where are they physically located? Age. How old are they? I mean, maybe you're trying to reach a couple different demographics. Maybe you're trying to reach a specific age group. Gender, ethnicity, language. This is particularly important because I've seen many ministries, well-meaning, trying to reach a certain demographic that may speak a certain language, but they're not actually providing resources, content, and advertising in that specific language. So we have to consider ethnicity and language. If we're trying to reach a specific people group, then our imagery should also reflect that people group. And of course, their interests. So what are they interested in? What might they find of value? So these are considered our surface level demographics, the things that first layer that we want to check off and make sure we have a clear idea where our audience is, how old they are, their gender, if ethnicity and language needs to be taken into consideration, and of course, what their specific interests are in terms of the ministry we're trying to reach. But to create deep connections, we have to identify what the core values, needs, and common experiences. So once you've determined those surface level demographics of your target audience, we want to work down deeper, which will help shape your messaging and the kind of content you're going to create. And unfortunately, a lot of ministry efforts, a lot of marketing efforts don't go past those surface level demographics. But where they're really, like, as I could say, at the meat and potatoes, what'll really help shape your content evangelism is going to those deep level characteristics, because ultimately people no longer fit into neat categories. So we must connect with them on a more profound level. So this can transcend, the standard marketing demographics of age, ethnicity, gender, language, location, and interest. If you can dig deeper, your audience will be loyal to your brand, to your ministry, to whatever services you're trying to provide, because you resonate with them at their core. So the best way to do that is to investigate their needs, understand their experiences, their values, and their perceptions. So you can even conduct surveys and interviews is also a good way to help understand and get that information that you're looking for. So under this category of asking questions, and of course I always make these presentations available and you can review this later, but I want to start by saying we have to put our assumptions and our judgments in the trash. So too often we create programs and content based on our own interest and passions, or based on what we think people need. according to our own perspective and biases. So remember, when we go back to the digital discipleship and evangelism model, what did Jesus do? He met people with their felt need, and then he bid them come and follow. He met them where they are. So if we are to meet people where they are, we cannot do that based on our assumptions, our own biases. We have to ask ourselves certain questions that will help us get into, like, inside the minds of our audience members. We have to understand what motivates their actions, what makes them who they are, what do they have in common, certain values. If you look at Christianity as a whole, it transcends multiple generations, maybe multiple different cultures and people groups, but they have one thing in common. They have their faith, and they have that value that they bear. And ask yourself, how can I speak and write in a way that my audience will find relatable? This will be different for each audience. What do they value? And what do they actually need? So this is going down deeper. This is saying, okay, what is it? How can I actually understand the lived experience of my target audience to then actually provide them with the kind of content or services or the ministry that they need so that faith will be relevant in their lives? And, again, remember, this is a model set forth by Jesus. Jesus attended to people's physical, emotional, and spiritual needs first. Then he bid them come and follow. As evangelists, we know that above all, people need our messages of hope and salvation. But to reach people, we must meet them where they are in their life and their spiritual journey. We must relate to them through their lived experience. It's not just about what we want to share. It's about prioritizing your audience's needs in order to build a meaningful relationship, which can therefore open the door to more spiritual conversations to take them into the direction of, the salvation issues that we want to share with them, the salvation topics. So when we look at, sort of these modern examples of felt needs, this can include things like a spiritually supportive community, affordable education, employment, medical care, safe places for their children, mentorship opportunities, a better future, healthy relationships, even self-improvement, like different struggles they might be dealing with, or lack of, when we looked at those 8 root causes of the 10 leading causes of death, like lack of education and resources, maybe that's a felt need for many people. Christian guidance on real life issues, food, security, abuse recovery, or even practical life skills training so that they can better their life. When we understand this, with this knowledge, we can then build relevant and meaningful content and communication strategy that directly fulfills their needs. So this is what we want to seek to understand, and without judgment, is get into the mindset of your target audience. Know what their felt needs are. Where are they in life? Where are they in their spiritual journey? What is the question they are asking? What is the need that they feel? What is their pain point? Core values. What do they value? Well, what is it that they want out of life, or they want out of a faith community, and what is it that they're looking for, they prioritize in their life, and where's that commonality between our faith? Shared experiences. What experiences might they have that will shape how they relate to faith, how they relate to religion, how they could possibly relate to your message? Motivations. Oh, going back to the shared experiences, remember, storytelling is very powerful because we can connect with people's experiences. So when you understand what those experiences are, then you can find and pair the right kinds of testimonies and the right kind of content to connect with those experiences. Of course, what motivates them? What's their driving factors? What gets them up in the day? What causes them to do the kind of things they do, that their interests, their behaviors, the certain actions that they take? Understand that. And then, of course, any additional insights. Now, I think towards the end of this presentation, I offer a link, but there's actually a fillable worksheet that you can download from my website, but we'll provide that link later that goes through everything that we're covering. Now, before I get into this idea of cultural empathy, I want to take a moment and specifically address youth for our church, because this is a highly at-risk group. And so we have to understand what makes them unique. And so I think because this is where the church is hurting the most with being able to reach and connect with our young people, I want to take a moment to speak to some specific things about how their world is different. And so if we're going to create content, if we're going to evangelize, if we're going to try and reach them, we have to understand them for how unique they truly are. So let's, answer the question, how is their world different? So youth today live in a totally different world and interact totally differently from any generation before them. So, and I'm sure this has already changed, but when asked what the most important historical event in the USA in the last 20 years was, they responded, the release of the iPhone. Now, most older people, and I'm saying this pre-COVID, but most older people would have said the terrorist attacks of 9/11. But the youth's answer actually makes sense, given that technology and digital communications have completely reshaped society, how we connect with each other and how we shop and how we live. They have grown up in almost an entirely digital world, and they relate to technology in a more integrated fashion than any generation before them. Now, given the current pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic that we are currently in, everyone's answer has probably changed, but this time it's for the same reason. We now all relate and interact and integrate with technology differently. So the release of the iPhone changed the younger generation, and then COVID has sped up adoption across all the generations. And so we have to kind of view the youth under this kind of the microscope of their world as being integrated with technology, but now we're all kind of understanding that in a different way. So when you're trying to target this group, there's some things you should know. They are actually going to account for about 1/3 of the total population. It is a very large generation, and they account for about 40% of all US consumers. So we're talking like teens to 20s. Okay, so this is like younger millennials and Gen Z. It's the most diverse generation in US history. They don't see diversity unless it's absent. And so this is incredibly important when you're trying to communicate with this generation through your visuals, through your imagery. Make sure that they are properly represented, because I can tell you, and I can tell you this from my own perspective, I don't notice diversity unless it's absent, unless I see lack of it, then I notice it. And so this is also sort of a lens you have to understand when you're communicating with them, when you're creating promotional materials, whatever it is that you're doing, it has to reflect the diversity of this demographic. The majority are non-white, they're actually majority Hispanic. 1 out of 10 will marry across racial ethnic lines. This is normal. I can say, even I'm a little obviously older than this group, but even within my circle of friends, this is perfectly normal. This is very common. They use technology for everything: grocery shopping, dating, socializing, studying, entertainment, communication, reading the Bible, cooking, everything. Education, and now literally everything. We're all kind of forced into this mode. 70% watch 2 or more hours of YouTube a day. So like I've said previously, if you are a church that is streaming its sermons, position your sermons for search, position your content for search on YouTube, because that is where they are. They prefer less public social media like Snapchat. They have a short attention span. 11% actually have ADHD, and they prefer images, icons, and symbols. So this is why they talk in like almost hieroglyphics via text and shorthand and stuff like that. So this is also why, to be able to understand and to speak to them, to recognize that it is almost like a different language, and that you really should have youth ambassadors who are helping to communicate to the younger generation, even leading out these ministries. Now, they are also the least religious generation ever. Only 63% are sure God exists. 35% are completely unaffiliated religiously. So these are the nones, the unaffiliated, or the quote unquote unchurched. 28% have never attended a religious service, and 13% are atheists. Now, this might seem really discouraging, But here's the thing, they're completely unchurched. It's not necessarily that they have left the church or they've had a bad experience with the church, is they have no experience. They have no connection. And so this may actually be a huge opportunity if we're willing to meet the challenge. If we're willing to go where they are and meet them with their felt needs, then we can make faith relevant to a generation that does not know God. Now, we've talked about, those deeper, those other characteristics, those deep characteristics, those core values and needs, previously when you're trying to understand your demographic. If you're targeting this particular demographic, here's what you need to know. They want their work to benefit the world. Actions, not words, is really important to reaching this generation. And they're worried about success. They have experienced a weak economy. They have seen the impact of the student loan crisis. They're now in the middle of COVID. They are worried about finances, and they're actually very fiscally conservative. They prefer to save over spend, which isn't great for consumerism, but they interact with media and want it to work from anywhere to fit their lives. So a lot of them won't even own cars. They use Uber, Lyft. They order their groceries online. They don't go to the grocery stores. Like, they were ahead of the curve before COVID came. They prefer one-on-one social media conversations over lectures. This is important for education. This is important where, with some of the pilots and stuff I'm doing with churches, where we're doing sort of these interactive sessions where they can ask questions and the pastor's answering, where it's not just, they don't want talking heads just speaking to them all the time. They want to have a conversation, and they're actually okay if at the end of the day you don't know all the answers, but they want to come to the table and have the conversation. And they want leadership opportunities. And then if there's anything you remember about them, is they believe in a social gospel of action, not words. So they want to be part of some group that is taking meaningful action to improve the lives of others. And so again, this is a huge opportunity to tap into just the potential and the energy of this group and their willingness to go out and do good in the world. So that's sort of, the first part. Now we're going to dig into this cultural empathy in the digital mission field. This, of course, covers all demographics, but I want you, for those of you who are especially focused on the youth, to take note of those previous 5 slides. So this concept of cultural empathy is well known in the physical mission field, right? Evangelism experts know that the best way to reach a community or people group is to empower a member of that community to evangelize to their own, or at the very least, speak the language of the people and show sensitivity and respect to their cultural paradigms. So, for example, a non-native members of a culture group must sincerely seek to understand the community and reach them where they are in a way that is relevant. We have forgotten this principle when it comes to online evangelism and online communities. While digital evangelism or discipleship is a new concept for the church, we can remember and apply tried and true bits of wisdom previously uncovered by experienced evangelists and geographically focused ministries. It is true. I want to challenge you. View digital platforms as countries. So instead of putting down, let's say, the younger generation and the fact that they speak in hieroglyphics, seek to understand, empower a young person to witness and speak the language that they speak. Go onto these different platforms, learn the language of the platforms, learn the norms and the types of content people like to interact with and the way they speak to each other. And you'll be able to reach a lot more people and connect with a lot more people. And again, this is a biblical concept. The Apostle Paul admonishes us to become all things to all men, that I may by all means save some. So we live in a world of intersecting cultures and communities, and therefore our definition of culture must expand. And so I'm going to challenge even our view of culture here. So we're kind of stuck in this old dogma, these old boxes, like, which box does my target audience check? Well, that doesn't really apply these days because there's so many of us that don't fit into a box. So many now find themselves between cultures and functioning in multiple communities simultaneously. So I'm going to take a moment just to expand our idea of culture. So So in order to identify sometimes those unifying threads between seemingly dissimilar people, so that when we think back to the surface level demographics, we might look at a group of people and think, wow, they're really dissimilar, when they might actually have some cultures that they share together. So we need to unpack your audiences or your potential target audiences, different culture influences. These cultures are potentially endless in variety, but can include what platform they're on. I've already talked about that. Age groups or generations. Gen Z is its own culture. And when we start recognizing that the way generations behave and speak and interact as a culture, then maybe we can respect and sympathize and empathize with it more. Genders, languages, people groups. Now, this is more traditional. You have race, ethnic, immigrant, but there's also a difference between immigrant and first generation or second generation. Like the way those of us who were born here interact with our parents who were not, like that's a subculture. We interact differently. Their current locations, the way people interact in a city versus the suburbs versus the country. These are cultures. Whether they're in school or out of school, they're a young professional or they're still in college. This is a different way of interacting with each other. Whether they've lived in a specific geolocation their whole life versus a transplant. I can tell you that I live in the DC metropolitan area, and there are so many Midwestern transplants in this area, and we somehow keep finding each other. And there's a culture there. There's a way that we speak and certain phrases that we use and certain jokes that we have. It's a subculture of transplants. You know, you have faith groups, you have lifelong Christians versus converts versus former Christians or non-believers. Those are like, I tend to gravitate towards others who are also converts because we have a lot more in common than people who've been lifelong Adventists. Professional groups versus homemakers versus working mothers. I can tell you I'm part of intersecting cultures of women who tech, who also have children at home, and that's kind of a subculture of its own. You have college educated versus blue collar workers. So I'm someone who's sort of in the college educated culture now, but I come from the blue collar world. Offline social clubs versus online identities and groups, poverty versus middle class versus wealthy. So really expand your idea of culture and really think about what cultures are acting upon my target audience and how are they affecting, how can I relate to them, and how can I find those commonalities. So this is just digging in to a little bit more of an example of me. And in that worksheet, I actually asked each of you who downloaded to kind of think about your own cultures and what influences you and helps shape who you are and how you can be communicated to. So if you look at me, as I said, I'm a Midwestern transplant to DC. I'm a Zennial, I'm not an Xer or a millennial, I'm somewhere in between. A first generation college educated, I'm an Adventist convert, I'm a vegetarian, gluten-free, that's the whole culture. I'm a professional woman, I'm a techie, I'm a working mother, a business owner, multicultural friend group with strong ties. You know, I have a multicultural friend group, but I also have strong ties to the Italian and the Jewish cultures through immigrant families. Like I have a lot of things working on me. And it's really interesting because we have changed, the complexities of culture have changed because the way we communicate to someone like me has to be dramatically different than how we would have communicated to my grandparents back in the day. So when we think of the old evangelistic sort of linear model or the old marketing models where everybody fit into these neat little boxes. So if you look at my grandparents on my mother's side, they were part of a homogenous community of Italian immigrants. They lived in the Midwest. They were coal miners, Catholic, and farmers. They all ate the same, worshiped the same, spoke the same language. The entire community functioned around the same industry, isolated from the general population, and they had the same education level. So the way we have to think about people groups has changed because we don't have these neat little boxes where everybody in a particular area is sort of the same. They have a lot of commonalities. Now we have a lot more complexities in our influences and our cultures. So, you know, take a moment to consider, and you can actually share. I encourage you guys to share on YouTube and Facebook, just like how this is resonating with you and think about your different cultures. Take a moment to consider your own intersecting cultures and how they may shape your core values and your needs, and please share. I always find that really interesting when people start thinking about this and the answers they come up with, because we really are such complex and unique people. The potential overlap in cultures found within your church, your community, your ministry, your target audience. This is a really interesting exercise to do too. I actually attend a very multicultural, multi-generational church. So it's a really helpful exercise when we start mapping that out in our brain. And then think about how they might influence behavior and needs, and what unifying factors can you identify among a group of people. Like, what brings everybody who might on the surface level seem very different, but why do they all go to the same church? What core values, what needs, what cultures are they sharing? So step 3, determine where your audience falls. And again, there's a whole worksheet that you can download that goes with this. But this is really important. And this is something that I see oftentimes we as Adventists, we fail to consider, and we end up just talking to ourselves, and that creates a barrier for converts or people who don't understand some of the language we use. So ask yourself, are you speaking to members or non-members of your denomination? Are they Adventist or non-Adventist? Your language may change based on the answer to this question. In fact, it should change. We must modify the way we communicate in order to effectively reach different audiences without creating barriers. For example, when we are talking to our friends, we use certain vernacular, that like tends to be more playful and friendlier. But when we are talking to our boss or elders, or our persona is more serious and professional, right? So the same is true with evangelism and discipleship. In my case, I'm a convert to evangelism, and yes, we are a peculiar people. And I have to tell you, there is a learning curve when you come into the Adventist church. And some people are, I think, inhibited by a perceived barrier. So I'm someone who decided to push through it and to figure it out. Because we use common terms like Sabbath or haystacks, or we talk about certain things that might seem foreign or confusing to non-Adventist. So for me, I was convicted enough to go through this learning curve, but I wonder about how many people feel excluded by language that they do not understand, or intimidated, or they don't understand the significance of something because they get caught up in the language we use. So this is something very important to consider. And my husband and I, on our personal ministry that we've launched, Angels in the Glen, we're both converts. I'm a convert actually from atheism, so I really had zero knowledge when I converted to the church about 20 years ago. My husband is a convert from just general Christianity. And so for our personal ministry, we make a concerted effort not to speak in such a way that is exclusively Adventist. So we're trying to reach specifically evangelicals or unchurched people or seekers from any background. And so we try to be very conscious of the language we use. So here are some groupings to consider when you're thinking about internal or external groups. We talk about evangelism, so we think, mostly about external groups. But if you're also looking to reach youth people or at-risk groups within our denomination, you might be speaking to lifelong Adventists. So I do want to take a moment to kind of divide what those two groups could possibly look like. And you can also consider phrasing unique to your community when you're addressing external audiences, or consider who your ministry communicates with on a regular basis, and think about what changes might need to be made. So internal audiences are your church members, your church leaders, corporate constituents. So, I have to make a typo. Bible study groups, youth groups, school participants, those raised in the church, longtime attendees, faith communities. The external audiences can be the broader community, neighborhoods, city, metro areas, businesses, related causes or nonprofit missions, local, news stations, if you're doing some kind of ministry or outreach, former members, Christians, other faith groups, and non-believers. So these are different groups that you can consider. So now we're going to take actually a brief commercial break. And maybe during this commercial break, if you can think and reflect upon some of your cultures and your intersecting influences and share them, I would really appreciate that, because I always love learning about others' experiences.
The Amazon Echo Dot is a hands-free voice control device that uses far-field voice recognition for voice-activated digital assistants. The North American Division Adult Ministries Department, with the aid of very talented Alexa programmers, has developed an Alexa skill for the Adult Bible Study Guide. This resource for the Echo Dot is in response to today's demanding, fast-paced society, delivering on-demand audio sharing and the daily Adult Bible Study Guide. As the program develops, there will be more commands and features programmed into the Adult Bible Study Guide Alexa skill. The North American Division Adult Ministries Department is proud to present this innovative tool for Bible study. This skill is now available in the Alexa Skill Catalog on Amazon.com.
When I first saw a turtle, my heart was full. Now I'm anything but lonely.
We had this deep connection, this heart connection.
He just wants to be close to you and part of your life.
Every day with Turtle is a perfect day.
When I'm holding her, it makes me feel calmer.
I think everything he does shows how much he loves us.
When we adopt a shelter pet,
We discover
they're a little bit of a lot of things.
But they're all pure
Pure love.
love.
Thank you. Welcome back. Now we're going to actually get into this idea of speaking to the collective we. And again, if anytime you have any questions, drop them into the Facebook comments or the YouTube comments, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. So this is where we can get a little bit deeper into the psychology of communication. So what I'm referencing here is the book, The Pendulum, How Past Generations Have Shaped Our Present and Predict Our Future. There's a short little blog article that I wrote that you can read to understand more, but I actually encourage you to also read the book. I think it's really relevant right now and really helpful to understanding the trends in our society right now. This book provides an analysis of the current shifts in society and their impact on marketing, technology, and communication, as well as insights into these drivers behind the collective shifts in society. So what is causing those shifts? What are the core values or changes or movements that are happening? So to better understand how to communicate more effectively to our audiences and fulfill their needs, I recommend that you read this book, or at least our blog post on this topic. There's also a chapter in the Digital Discipleship and Evangelism blog that covers this challenging topic, but it's very, very interesting, and the book was a very rewarding read. Now, this is a little difficult for some of us to consider just how predictable we as people really are. We tend to think of our time and situation as unique, and so we naturally resist this idea that perhaps mankind has been in a similar social situation before. But the Bible tells us this is true. It says, what has been will be again, and what has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. And I know for me, when I was reading this book, it was one of the sort of most startling takeaways. So what Pendulum does is it takes the Strauss and Howe's 4 generations, if you're familiar with that. So that idealist, that reactive, that civic, that adaptive, and it reduces it down to 2 generations covering 40 years that oscillate between sort of the individuality, freedom, uniqueness, and potential of the me, which is kind of, which peaks actually in 1983 the last time, and is sort of that embodied by the idol worship and the me generation, to this collective we, which is working together for the common good, fixing society's greatest problems, and rejecting the pretense for authenticity and transparency. This should sound really familiar because we are about to peak at the we of the pendulum. And so this is a little bit comforting, but it can also be a little bit unsettling because we have a few more years to go. And anytime we go to the extremes of the pendulum, there is, upheaval and big change. Now, this group predictability, the main point is that group behavior is predictable. And we can use this predictability to speak to the masses in a relevant way. So it doesn't predict everyone all the time. It's just the groups and the swings of people. But to maximize results, we should fish where there is the highest potential for the highest catch. Meaning, yes, there are always going to be outliers when we view the pendulum model and how our society is shifting. But if we're going to catch fish for the kingdom, then we need to consider these group drivers, these group changes in how we shape our language and how we speak to our audiences so that we can communicate in a way that resonates. So, to communicate then we must ask what is driving the actions and the attitudes of the group. So we kind of drill down before into those core values and there's intersecting cultures. Now we're going to go back up and we're going to look at what is society doing? What has changed about society and how can my mission and my message, which we talked about in that foundations presentation, fit, or can it be positioned into these paradigms? So you don't necessarily have to change your mission, but you may have to change how you position your content and the words you use to talk about your mission to your audience. And so what does this look like? So we talked about those two pendulum swings. You have the peak of the we and then the peak of the me. We are currently heading towards the peak of the we. Now, this is the part where it's a little bit scary because this book was written over a decade ago, but the author accurately predicted what we are now seeing in societal unrest. So these authors are actually Christian and they wrote the book as a warning because the peak of we often results in a lot of social unrest and turmoil, and we haven't peaked yet, but we are seeing this. So I strongly recommend that you read their book. Obviously, when we look at the peak of the we, it should sound really familiar to what we're experiencing. This idea of I'm okay, you're not okay. So this is where we get sort of the Twitter mobs and stuff like that. This sort of purity culture or the witch hunts. Applauds personal responsibility. That's a good thing. Believes a million men are wiser than one. This is why we have so many crowdsourcing things. And what's really positive is, these groups of people coming together to each do their little part. They want to create a better world. It's about small actions. So again, tying into that personal responsibility, we all can do something. We can all lower our footprint, our carbon footprint or whatever. It desires to be part of a productive team. We even see this in education where the way we're educating kids now is giving them more and more team and collective working opportunities because that has become so important in our culture. It admires humility and thoughtful person. It believes leadership is this is the problem as I see it, let's solve it together. So this goes back to, really that core of the Generation Z where they want to be part of the gospel of action. They want to be part of something productive. They want to be part of change and they want to improve the world. It also strengthens society's sense of purpose and they focus on solving problems. So this, in sort of the 80s, it was sort of like flawless people we worshiped, but now we have sort of these anti-heroes. And obviously I'm not going to get into politics or anything because I believe as a Christian, we should endeavor to resist tribalism. But because we always must remember that God is in control and not man. But I want you to consider these characteristics and what it means for our collective mission of spreading the gospel and serving the felt needs of our communities. So the category under we, this is where we're going. We're going to be in this for the next several years. So when you're considering your messages, when you're considering how to mobilize your volunteers and everybody, think about this bucket and how that might be influencing whether or not how they want to be involved and how you can leverage your ministry. Now, this shift can actually be seen in successful advertising campaigns that target a worldview attitude instead of an age group. So again, this is that when we're looking across maybe multiple demographics, multiple age groups, but there's something unifying. And so this is a worldview, this is an attitude, this is the peak of the we. So if you remember the L'Oreal's famous me slogan, which was because I'm worth it, that lived with us for a really long time. I even remember that, because I'm worth it. But when society passed the tipping point of 2003, the old slogan was actually replaced with the we slogan, which is because you're worth it. So the language has changed. So now advertising uses more collective words, or the focus is on the audience. It's you and your and those kind of words. So our language has to change. We have to consider this. Now, the interesting thing is during this same period, there was this successful army slogan, which is be all that you can be. Again, focused on me. It changed to Army of One in 2001 and 2006, and it didn't perform well because it was tone deaf to the change of society. It was contrary to the idea of teamwork. So, the current more refocused slogan is Army Strong. So it goes back into that team building. So these are just some examples from secular society that show how we've moved from a me idol worship society to more of the collective we society. Now, the values that are also acting on this target audience, which is really important. So this is covering all demographics at this point. Of course, you have outliers and you have people who haven't gone with the shifting tide. But if you're going to communicate to a broad audience, these are the things to consider. They value authenticity. I know I've talked about this in the past with Gorgeous to God, and we're going to talk about it again in a moment. This idea of teamwork, humility, small actions, personal responsibility, and that cold hard truth. They don't want everything polished and cleaned over. It's okay if your video isn't perfect. They just want authenticity, and they reject the hype, the overpromising, the arrogance or wishful thinking. They reject self-righteousness and sugar-coated nonsense. They just want plain truth. Now, social media is a powerful tool for member care and service, but never before has truth in advertising been so important. So the younger generations are the most connected, more than any before them, and they naturally turn to social media to voice their displeasure with a brand or experience. So that might be the church. I see young people all the time speak out with their displeasure from the church on social media. And basically, it's this. Your advertising or your messaging may fool or hurt one of us, but that one will tell the rest of us. So when we go back to those branding principles and we think about those holistic touch points, we have to make sure that we are authentic and genuine and that we're really meeting people's needs and showing the same brand and the same personality across all the different touch points, because they will reject it otherwise. Now, what is really interesting for us here is what the audience is looking for, what the collective group on social media is looking for is this humility, the straight talk, and a genuine point of view that the church needs to embrace. And we see this effectiveness, and I know in the past sessions I've talked about Gorgeous to God. It's a community of young women tackling real issues from a godly perspective, because young women these days, they are facing issues that I certainly didn't have to deal with, and they need real answers to their felt needs, to their current pain points. And so we share true stories from the experiences of real girls. They're shared, and it's in a candid way that the church has not embraced previously. And these topics are a lot of really uncomfortable topics that the church typically doesn't want to cover or feel comfortable covering, but it's things like rape and self-harm and depression and abuse and sex before marriage. And the reason why this ministry is so effective, and some of the other pilots that I'm working on are so effective, is because we're just talking candidly about real issues people are facing, the pain points, the felt needs, what are their core values are from a Christian perspective. And so this is something, understanding this pendulum swing, this we culture, this is how we can change our messaging. This is how we can change our content to speak to the masses. And that is just by being genuine and open and transparent. Now, step 5 in understanding your audience is creating a persona, or creating that complete picture. Because when you communicate to your audience, you want to visualize actual people. their interests, their culture, their wants, their needs, and expectations. This will help refine your voice. It'll also help you determine how to position your content and what kind of content you should be covering. So you will probably need to create unique personas to represent your different target groups if you have more than one within your audience. I highly recommend it. If you're wondering what a persona is, and again, the worksheet has a little area for you to work this out and brainstorm. But a persona is a fictional character that communicates the primary characteristics of a group or segment of your audience and takes into consideration their needs, their demographics, their motivations, and environments. So using this framework that I've laid out can help you create your audience personas in order to help you develop and write content that will be relevant and useful to your audience. Again, this is a way, once you've taken all these factors into consideration, where you have the cultural empathy, you have the surface level demographics, the deep level demographics, this idea of the we culture and all their different cultures that are interacting on them, then you take all this information and you create a persona so that you can visualize and speak to an actual person when you're creating your content. Now, the best personas combine both quantitative and qualitative information. In other words, data like location and age combined with those felt needs, those core values, and sort of those general drivers of a generation, like when we talked about the younger generation. Here's an example. So social media personas are developed based on your target audience, as we defined earlier in this presentation. So the key to finding out what those people want and need, the rest is simply compiling those qualities into a made-up person. So we take all this information that we've been talking about up until this point, and then you compile it into a person. Now, as a church, we need to constantly find ways to reach our audience for the kingdom in the best, most efficient way possible. And this whole presentation is an outline of an exercise you can do to understand your target audiences, to really put yourself in their shoes so that you know how to speak to them. And you can certainly go through this and kind of understand more deeply and adapt it to whoever your audience is later. So creating social media personas is a valuable exercise that enables us as communicators to step into another person's shoes and view life from their perspective. They help you develop empathy with the audience because suddenly you have a face, you have a person, you have a life, you have a lived experience that you are trying to connect with. So many of you have been with me over several presentations now, and you may have noticed that empathy is a common theme of mine. So to reach people, we have to connect with them without judgment, but with love and understanding. And this is how we can do that, is when we sincerely put away our assumptions, put away our expectations as to what we would like to talk about, and get into their life, get into their skin, and try and understand the view from their perspective without judgment, just with empathy, and seeking to do as Jesus did, to meet them where they are with their felt need, with whatever their pain point may be. So now number 6, this is, it's called the emotional marketing value. And, I know previously when we talked about content and stuff, that you want to choose images that evoke an emotional response. But there's also a way that we can kind of formulate our language to also help connect with the reader, because, like, for example, if you're sending an email, your subject line really has to put that value proposition up front so the person can even open it, because your message can't have impact unless it's opened. Your video can't have impact unless it's viewed. Your post or your blog post can't have impact unless it's read. And so how do we communicate the value? Reaching your target audience in a deep and emotionally compelling way is a key to effective communication. So powerful evangelism and, in creating authentic connection. So you have to really think strategically about your words in order to do this. So in the case of mission work and cause-based initiative, strategic placement of keywords can actually help facilitate deeper thought and increase impact on the reader, driving them to action. Because ultimately, we just don't want to have people interact with our content. We want to facilitate change, whether that's a change in attitude towards themselves or towards God, or we want them to take an action to request more information or a Bible study or to come to a program or to pray more, like whatever it is we're asking them to do. So in Digital Discipleship and Evangelism, that first 4-part series, we gave a framework for constructing posts. So here we're going to actually focus on creating connection with our words. So this is slightly different than what we covered before. So your message must be read in order to have impact, as I said. So in other words, the best online writing incorporates high impact words in a way that is quickly understood by the reader and evokes an emotional response. So we are all, after all, highly emotional beings, whether or not we want to admit it, who often make decisions based on what directly affects us. So in a world of competing priorities and overwhelming need, this can be a useful tool to help your message stand out among the digital clutter. Because remember, people are getting, the massive men lead lives of quiet desperation, as Thoreau said. Like, we are inundated with messages and content. How do we cut through the clutter? And this is just a little exercise that you can do to help with phrasing of your headlines. Do this also in concert with that content evangelism technique of, looking at search queries and how people are actually searching for things and kind of combining these two to figure out how to phrase your headlines and your titles. So the emotional richness of copy is actually evaluated based on these 3 categories. So intellectual, empathetic, so this is that emotional part, and then spiritual. Now, as a church, we should definitely excel in the spiritual aspect of that. And so you can actually go to the website that I have on the side called aminstitute.com/headline. And you can play with your different headlines, to find ways to phrase it so that your titles, your headlines, your video names, or whatever it is, will help create that connectedness and register with the person that it's about them. Now, the best headline teasers have an emotional marketing value score of over 40. It takes a little bit of time to practice, but go to this website. Think of it again as in the framework of content evangelism and the techniques that we use there, and how to speak conversationally to help shape your headlines. And the more you do this, the better you get at it. So here's just some, examples. So here what we did is this is an example of a headline that got an EMV score of about 50%. And it's feeling defeated, marriage is hard, and you're struggling. We're here for you. Join us for a free seminar. Now, notice a couple of things about this. Is we're validating their experience, and we are offering a solution. And certain words that we're using, like we're here for you, join us for a free seminar. So we're also asking them to take action. We're also using that language of the we pendulum, the we generation, where we use words like your and you to help the reader realize that we're actually speaking to them. All right, so we want to overall consider your EMV in the context of the framework for your audience that we've been building. So, because in order to shape your message to create relevant responses to your target audience, you must understand what and with what language will most resonate with your audience. So it's a lot more complicated than we often think. We think we just put a message out there into social media and we have an idea about who we want to reach, but we really have to dig deep because we have to consider what content is actually relevant and then how do we word it so it resonates with the audience we're trying to reach. There are a lot of simultaneous factors acting on your audience at all times. All of this builds up to you effectively shaping your messages and developing content that matches your audience's needs and reaches them effectively, no matter their age, their gender, their ethnicity, location, or situation. So we have the surface level demographics, we have the deep level demographics, those core values, those needs, those pain points, cultural empathy. So these expectations and norms, this internal versus external, the drivers behind the collective shifts, creating your personas, and then the actual phrasing, your emotional marketing value. So there's a lot going on in, when you're speaking to your audiences. It's more than just sharing your thoughts. And ultimately, my friends, no one should know more about your audience than you. So become an expert on the people you are trying to reach. Again, put your assumptions aside and seek to truly understand their experience, who they are, and what they will relate to. Free resources, as always, you can go to sdadata.org or my personal website, jdim.digital. There's some free resources there. And actually on my website, you can get the download for the worksheet. You can get the book if you haven't already. It's available in print and digital. I believe we've sold now over 1,000 copies. I have to confirm that I'm very excited about it. And you can watch all the archived videos from this series at nadadultministries.org. Now we're going to take a brief commercial break, but when we return, we're going to get to your questions.
The Amazon Echo Dot is a hands-free voice control device that uses far-field voice recognition for voice-activated digital assistants. The North American Division Adult Ministries Department, with the aid of very talented Alexa programmers, has developed an Alexa skill for the Adult Bible Study Guide. This resource for the Echo Dot is in response to today's demanding, fast-paced society, delivering on-demand audio sharing and the daily Adult Bible Study Guide. As the program develops, there will be more commands and features programmed into the Adult Bible Study Guide Alexa skill. The North American Division Adult Ministries Department is proud to present this innovative tool for Bible study. This skill is now available in the Alexa Skill Catalog on Amazon.com.
When I first saw Turtle, my heart was full. Now I'm anything but lonely.
We have this deep connection, this heart connection.
He just wants to be close to you and part of your life.
Every day with Turtle is a perfect day.
When I'm holding her, it makes me feel calmer.
I think everything he does shows how much he loves us.
When we adopt a shelter pet,
We discover
they're a little bit of a lot of things.
But they're all
Pure
pure
love.
love.
Hello, everyone. It looks like we have a few questions to begin with. Let's see. We have how to bridge the challenge of communicating with a multi-generational church family. Do you aim for the youngest and have the rest to adopt? Well, I think depending on your situation, I think, and this is from Robin Davis, so thank you for writing that question. It's a very good question. I think it depends on what you're trying to promote and what specifically you're trying to do. I think particularly the younger generation, we do have to almost treat them different. And again, I want to go back to this idea of uplifting and empowering a young person to lead in this area, because we know, as I said, when it comes to physical mission fields, the best way to reach a people group is to uplift someone within that people group. That is true for generations. So if we really want to reach the young people, then we should give them leadership opportunities. We should give them ministry opportunities to explore their creativity and use their natural skills, because they are natives on these digital platforms. So I think there are a lot of commonalities between your different generations. Every church obviously is going to be unique, but you're going to have sort of those common threads. And that's why I think it's really important to go through this exercise, download the workbook, and kind of go through it for your church and your different audiences. So you can see, are there commonalities between the generations? Do I need to treat them completely separate? Or is there some kind of unifying force? And I would say mostly in a multi-generational, multicultural church like the one I attend, we share the core values. That is what we share. So you might look at, members of our local church and say, oh, they're so different. Why are they so different? But the thing is, we are also the same. We have the same core values and the core needs. Do we have separate programs for youth? Yes, of course. And they have their own way of communicating and sharing ministry and stuff like that. And we encourage that. So I would say more of a blended approach, if that makes any sense. I can only say that from not really knowing your specific situation, but just speaking broadly. Oh, okay. So Claudia Smith, please remind us how to obtain a copy of your book in Canada. So unfortunately, what I understand is there is a very high postage fee for shipping outside the US. So I would actually recommend downloading the digital version. It is available on Kindle. You can get it on Amazon. I have only written one book. So if you search Digital Discipleship and Evangelism, Jamie Dom on Amazon, you should be able to get the book, and you can download it as the Kindle version. And I believe that's like $9.95 or something like that. Allison Down is asking, does the group drivers work only within a given community, or can it work over a larger territory? Yes, actually that is, I don't know if you're talking about the sort of the we versus me, or the just other like core needs and principles, but the group drivers, when I was talking about the pendulum, that is Western society. So I guess I didn't make that clear. So this is taking the 30,000 foot level and looking at Western society. So we're talking Europe, North America, and South America, and Australia, and maybe some others, but essentially that is all of Western society. And we see this across the different continents. We see it in Europe. We see this move for a collective across all these different areas. Now, the interesting thing, and they go into this in the book a little bit more, is the Western society is now peaking towards the we. Eastern society, so this includes, Asia, Africa, the Middle East, is actually going towards me. So we're actually reverse each other. So if anybody's listening from like Africa or Asia, Japan, Middle East, read the book, and that's a little bit more, you can get a better idea of what drivers might be working upon the broader culture. Robin Davis, how do we view this later for review and application? All right, so there's two ways. I am making the presentation available to the NAD Adult Ministries, Personal Ministries. I believe they're posting them on their website. I actually am going to send them an updated version because I noticed a typo on one of the slides. Also, if you go to my website, jdim.digital/publications, you can actually download the Understanding Your Audience worksheet. And that is a fillable form that actually goes through. So I would recommend that you download the PowerPoint and use that as reference as you go through the worksheet, as you go through and work through your different audiences for consideration. So I hope that helps. Does anybody have any other questions? I want to make sure we take a few minutes so that everybody gets their questions answered, because I guess last time I actually thought we were done and there were some more questions that came in. So I apologize for that. Another thing, I know there's a lot that we, so yes, I will post it. jdim.digital/ and then I believe it's nadadultministries.org, but let me check the website real quick for that. And I'll do that right now. We can get back to that, and I believe we'll drop that into the chat box for you so you can see. Yes, it's nadadultministries.org. That has all the archived videos, and I believe that they are posting the PowerPoints and the other resources that I have been providing up on that landing page. So does anybody want me to go through anything anymore, or you have like a specific question? I know we covered a lot tonight, and some of this, might have some gears turning, or if anybody wants to share sort of, if they've had any aha moments throughout this presentation, and how they think, this could actually certainly help them, with communicating to your unique audience. So you could also just share some feedback, and I always appreciate that too. And I appreciate all of you who have been with me through this whole presentation series. It is a joy and a delight for me to be sharing these messages. I truly believe that the next Great Awakening will be a digital one, and it's going to involve a cultural shift at all levels of the Adventist Church.
Thanks, Jamie, for sharing this complete foundational curriculum in digital discipleship and evangelism. You've given us the tools we really need to initiate, sustain, and succeed in ministry on the digital landscape. Tonight's episode was the concluding installment for Sister Jamie Dom, but not the close of the Digital Discipleship and Evangelism webinar series. In just 2 short weeks, on Monday, April 5th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, we're going to begin the 30-minute webinar series entitled Tools You Can Use, and it begins with an emphasis on Sabbath School. You won't want to miss it. Please tell your friends all about it. And to our audience, we thank you so much for joining us tonight. Please keep on liking us on Facebook and keep on subscribing to our YouTube channel, and by all means, remembering to click the bell. Remember to invite your friends next time. I'm J. Alfred Johnson II, your North American Division Adult Ministries Director. Let's praise God for Sister Jamie Dom and her ministry to us, and also ask the Holy Ghost to use us as we place all of these principles into operation on the digital mission field. Loving Lord, thank you so much for Sister Jamie Dom and her ministry to us. We pray that we may have the privilege of always presenting these things in your spirit to the individuals that we interact with on the digital landscape. Guide us and direct us to this end, and may your name and your kingdom always receive all of the praise, honor, and glory. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. And once again, Sister Dom, we thank you so much. And to our audience, we will look forward to seeing you next time on April 5th.